What is up, guys? Welcome back to Will of DDT. My name is Anonymous, and I am here with my co-host Obipity. And today we wanted to bring you a revised O7 tier list. As this meta has gone on, and Obipity, I want you to comment on this as well, whatever you got to say about this. But as this meta has gone on, it's really sort of shaken up from what we thought was, it was originally going to turn out to be when we first saw the Japan meta.
No, I totally agree with you. I think as we've got into like a month and a half into this meta, we've seen that there are actually a lot of decks that are very playable, and that North America just plays a little bit differently, or a lot more differently than other metas.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, you'll be seeing a lot of the same leaders here, I think, overall, but their placements, I think, change pretty considerably. So let's just get right into it, man. I mean, first things first, if you haven't seen our previous video on this, you can feel free to check that out. We'll leave a link in the description. Can maybe give you a better idea of where we started from and where we've kind of shifted to in this. But we're also going with just a simpler tier system this time. We're just going by numbers. Pretty self-explanatory. Unseen is leaders that could be kind of good in some matchups, but you're not going to see. Then we've got tier 2, which is again probably not winning any tournaments, but you'll probably see a few roaming around at regionals. And then 1.5, 1, and 0.5 surprise are the leaders that we expect that you'll probably be seeing a lot of at regionals events. And all of them have probably a shot at winning, or at least topping at a big event.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And to start us off, we have Uta, and the only reason we have Uta on here is because we had her in the first video. And I think for some reason, I thought we would at least see some Uta. And we're just not seeing it at all, right? It's just, Bonney is just the better green leader, and that's entirely fair.
Yeah, that's literally it. I think Bonney's leader ability is just too strong. There's not a single other green leader right now, pure green leader, that anybody wants to try out.
Exactly. And then moving on, you have the Grape Dofi, and really this is coming into this meta, people were just kind of like, oh, like Birdcage Dofi kind of beats Law. It doesn't. I'm sorry. Like, it really just does not beat Law. Sure, there's some games that you may be able to squeak it out, like if Law doesn't see its rush or it just isn't able to go wide enough and remove your board. But majority of the time, Law is still absolutely cooking this deck.
Yeah, exactly. And like, even in the hypothetical where everything goes perfect and you do cook Law, I mean, this deck does not stand a chance against most of the other decks in the meta right now. Coming up next, we've got the Vegapunk himself. A really cool deck, a really fun deck. I did want to see someone crack the code on this and get something a little higher with this. I know we've seen some local success with this, Obipity, right? We've seen some pretty competitive locals actually surprisingly topped with Vegapunk. But I just highly doubt that even those folks who are having fun with Vegapunk at locals are ever going to take it to a regionals. It's just not. It's not there.
Yeah, Vegapunk, I think, at its best, plays a little bit like Enel. But just a leader that isn't able to attack is just always going to inherently be worse. And I think, like, you would have that leader, like, if the leader was 3 life, I think it might actually be, like, tier 1. A lot of the triggers require it to be at 2 life. I mean, this is just entirely theory crafting here, but it's not helpful that it can attack, basically.
For sure. That's the crazy part. I think we came from kind of clowning Vegapunk when we first saw it to now kind of acknowledging that it's in this weird spot where if any of its stats were higher, if you made it a leader that could attack, or if you made it start off with 3 life, we're suddenly like, oh, damn, that's overpowered. Like, we've seen people play it and realize that it's actually pretty scary what this deck can do. If it were any higher than it currently is in terms of its stats, its starting life, and its attacking ability, it actually might just be busted. So so we definitely respect Vegapunk, but unfortunately it is like tuned perfectly so that it just isn't that competitive right now.
It's almost too perfect, or it's almost tuned too perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. Next up down here, what do we got, Obipity?
We got Foxy. And I haven't played this leader. I have played against it, and I've seen, I think Bujineta's played it a few times. When this set came out, Muginator was very excited to play the deck, but I think he quickly realized it's just not that playable in this meta. You can definitely cheese out some wins, like just people not knowing how to play against the deck. But again, overall, just purple by itself in this meta, it just doesn't do very well.
Yep. Yeah. I don't think there's much more to say on there. I'm curious, do you want to just put the other 07 leaders that we did cover in the previous video? I know we didn't talk about it, but I think might as well just throw Dragon on here.
Yeah, we'll throw Dragon there, and I think that's the only other 07 spoiler, guys. It's the only other 07 leader that's going to be down here.
Yeah. Dragon, again, really good leader in terms of just maybe an off-meta context, crazy amounts of just really big swings, but it's not enough in a meta full of blockers and full of leaders that can rest your attackers and leaders that heal all the time. It's just, swinging 7k over and over and over is just not going to get you anywhere. So unfortunately, Dragon doesn't make the cut. But moving on to tier 2, these are leaders that, again, we don't expect you. I wouldn't expect to run into one at regionals, but I expect to know someone who does, kind of thing. Like, you'll probably see it somewhere on the table you're playing at. So here we have got Boa at tier 2. Obipity, do you want to kind of tell us why this falls here?
So it has had success in some of these store regionals.
For sure.
But with a caveat. The guy that won the store regional did start off his deck profile with saying, "Yeah, I didn't go against a single Lucci."
A single Lucci, yeah.
And like when you go into a regional, you're gonna see Luccis, and this deck just having or the lead ability just requiring you to not have that many cards in hand isn't like it's just not good. In a game that requires you to have resources, not having resources it's just not going to help you win games, right? What I will say, it is the best use of the 10 cost Kaido that returns an 8 and 3 cost to hand that we've seen in the game so far.
That's a clean play for sure. You get to draw off of that, which is really nuts. Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's the leader ability is a little quirky in that you have to stay at low hand size, and yeah, it's got good removal in the form of Gravity Blade, but unfortunately it just dies to Lucci, and it just really can't outpace a lot of the best decks in the game. So, it's going to be tier 2. Here we've got Red Purple Luffy. Again, kind of a sleeper pick. It is a 6k leader that can ramp, so because of that, it can actually do pretty well into Law, just because Law can't just get free counters out of hand by just swinging 5k repeatedly. But I just don't think we're going to see as many of them as we were expecting initially.
I think part of that comes down to, so again, there are some decks that do well into Law. They just don't do well into anything else. And Luffy, again, just falls into this category. It can do well because it's a 6k leader, so it's inherently just a little harder to attack it. But again, it's 3 life, and its entire game plan is just getting to that top end and then just swinging tall. So as long as you're able to properly build a board and just keep swinging 6, 6, 6, 6, it's kind of like how you used to play against Whitebeard. You just keep swinging 6, and then when it gets to end game, you just put all your Dawn on one character, your strongest character, and just swing high. And that's the game plan here. The only difference is you don't have hand advantage with this leader.
Right, exactly. Luffy is not starts off as half as many life as Whitebeard, so just the card advantage is not quite there. I just don't expect a Red Purple Luffy to really get to the top, but definitely may steal some wins against Laws. Who knows?
Yep.
Next up we got Yamato, who is, again, all of us here at the channel kind of think this is a really stupid leader. It's just brain dead. I mean, you just shove down on the leader and go for double attacks, and the thing is, it works sometimes.
It's extremely high rolly, and like if you are able to high roll multiple games in a regional and you play this, you might end up doing well, but don't expect to. Just don't expect to do that well with this leader.
Right.
But you very well could just beat some players because they're not able to draw enough counter or have any blockers set up.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, against this deck, if you're unable to set up blockers, then you could literally just die before you even get to play
Yeah.
the game. So, yeah. So a few people might play Yamato, and they might have some success. And then we are seeing Katakuri over here. This leader is interesting to me because I actually feel like he has a good time against some of the best decks in the game. Weirdly enough, I feel like Katakuri's always done well into the removal meta. So like when Sako was running the game,
Yeah.
now that Lucci showed up, and Moria has made a big resurgence as well. Weirdly enough, Katakuri, just because it has that 10 Dawn win button and it has a bunch of triggers that can come out of life after the black player has already spent too much Dawn removing units, and then they can't remove whatever came out of the trigger. Like, Katakuri is just actually very obnoxious for the removal leaders in the game. So if a Katakuri sees a bunch of Luccis and Morias throughout the day, they can actually do well at a tournament. But unfortunately, I do think Katakuri just gets cooked by like Black Yellow Luffy, Laws. I don't think it does well into a lot of the rest of the meta.
Yeah, I think basically Law, Black Yellow Luffy. I think maybe Dofi probably does really well into Katakuri.
For sure.
But it's weird because like theoretically it should do well, right?
Yeah.
Because like it's a five. It like you have a bunch of 5-life leaders in this meta.
Right.
And then like you said, the removal leaders, they don't tend to do that well into Katakuri because they maybe not, even if they have no board, it's just 10 Dawn, you play your 10 Mom, and then there you go. It's just you automatically lose a life and gain a life.
Exactly.
But I think Law just absolutely destroys it. Law is pretty much easy. Law is free for this.
For sure. Yeah.
I should say Katakuri is free for Law.
Even Bonney, I mean, they'll get to play their 10 moms, but Bonnie's like resting one every turn.
Yeah.
it's like it's I just don't think Katakuri really does well into a lot of the meta. But again, it's always given Black a run for its money. So we'll see if any Katakuris end up making it to those top tables.
And then next up we have Reiju. And surprising enough, we did see a Reiju get top 3 in, I believe it was Europe today.
Yeah.
Today is August 4th, so I think it did get a top 3 in Europe, and it's a good deck. It's just the deck has changed a little bit in OP7. You run the 3-cost Portia, you run a couple of the Foxy Pirates. So on one turn, you're able to get out a 3/5 swing, and then if you're able to have your 4-cost, which one is it?
EGG.
Which button is it? EGG. And you're able to play the 7-cost. You have a 5, a 7, and then of course leader swing. So it's just it's just a tempo deck. You're trying to swing as much as possible, go as wide as possible. It's kind of like it's almost like Law, but without the removal. Without the removal aspect.
Yeah, and for that reason, it's actually, I would say, the only thing kind of gatekeeping it out of the top tables is the presence of Law, because Reiju's characters need to be at less Dawn than the opponent in order to get their effects off, and then Law is aggressively minusing Dawn, so usually Reiju has a tough time being lower than him. But against any other deck, honestly, Reiju is solid. We recently recorded some rumbles for our channel where, Mujinator's been kicking some butt with Reiju, man. And it's even against like Lucci and Moria, it's like, you'll trash its characters, but she can play them right back from trash, like just by minusing 1 Dawn. So
exactly.
It's solid deck actually into pretty much everything besides Law.
Yeah, and that's probably going to be a common theme here, where Law kind of gatekeeps a lot of these leaders. Yeah,
for sure. Now we're getting to tier 1.5 here, so at the bottom of the list we've got Perona. A few mad lads have been running around with these Perona builds that are actually pretty freaking annoying. Like, she's scary for 100%. If I see a Perona sitting across the table from me, I'm not at all thinking like, oh, free win. Like, she can actually be pretty darn good. The fact is, against Law, like, their entire deck is 4-cost, and Perona can very easily just rest that and attack it. And I mean, does that mean that she wins against Law? No, not necessarily, but it's definitely annoying, right? Like, Law has this ability to just spit out a board and then just keep them all safe by having them active until he does this explosive turn turn where he just goes a bunch of 5s, Perona kind of interrupts that strategy by being able to rest those active characters and just demand cards out of Law's hand if he wants to keep them. So yeah, her ability is pretty freaking good, and just good access to things like 10 cost Dofi, but then also a lot of the black package like 8 cost Moria and the Ryumas to pop rested characters. It's a solid deck. It's actually a pretty solid deck.
Yeah, and you see people running the Wano package as well, so like
hella draw power.
Yeah, so much draw, right? Like at some point they have like 8, 9, 10 cards in hand, and you're sitting there like, wait, like how did that happen?
For real,
where did those cards come from? But yeah, I mean that's the deck. Yep. Essentially anything that has access to 8 cost Moria is gonna do well.
Yeah, exactly, man.
And then next,
what do we got next?
Next up, I believe we have Blue Dofi. I wish Bia was here. He'd be able to speak to this. He did just play Gen Con Treasure Cup with Blue Dofi, and he went X3. Yeah. He's really good with the deck. And I think the one reason I don't have this deck a little bit higher is because I think it is a very tough deck to pilot.
Yes.
Just being able to remember what cards that you stacked with Peronas and Dofis, and then being able to use your resources properly. And then of course having access to things like 7 cost, Raging Tiger, right? That absolutely cooks Law. Like if you see 2 of those against Law, like you're in a pretty good spot for Dofi. But again, another deck that just goes wide and then has the tempo to just demand those 1-2k counters multiple times in each turn.
Exactly. And a lot of ways to keep hand size pretty steady. He's got the Edward Weevil, which draws him a card. He has Jinbei, so he can do develop 2 attackers alongside a 7k swing. Yeah, just a strong deck, pretty scary deck. Like you said, I don't think any of his wins are free. I think he probably doesn't like seeing a Lucci with stage. That's probably a tough matchup for Dofi. But overall, he just is able to develop a bunch of 5 and 6k bodies like really, really fast, and just force the opponent into a bad spot pretty quickly.
Exactly. And then next up we have Bonney. And I think Bonnie's actually dropped a little bit in the last couple of weeks. I think we've seen a resurgence of Moria, which kind of just destroys Bonney. And of course, Law absolutely destroys Bonney. Bonney just does really well into Enel.
True.
And Anonymous, you could probably speak to how it does into BY Luffy. How does it do into BY Luffy?
So Bonney is kind of stomping those leaders that are on the fringe there. So like Enel and BY Luffy you just mentioned are the 2 yellow leaders that are like really strong in this meta, and Bonney does really well into both of them. I mean, she's very tough for both Enel and BY Luffy. Yeah,
but it's very popular right now, and if you go to regional or local or pretty much anywhere, I would probably say for 35 to 40% of people will be playing this deck. Maybe not at a regional, definitely at a local.
For sure.
But at regionals, we're still definitely going to see a ton of this deck.
Yeah, it's super hard to.
Yeah. As an Enel player, it is very annoying seeing this deck.
Oh yeah, 100%. As a BY Luffy player, it's very annoying. It's just, it's very hard to predict because a lot of people are kind of falling off because Law and Lucci are favored into Bonney, but a lot of good Bonney players are winning those matchups anyway. So yeah, it's honestly just so difficult to predict whether or not we'll be seeing a lot of Bonney at regionals, but definitely there will be a big minority, I guess we can say, that are playing Bonney. So it's something you got to watch out for sure.
And then next up we have Enel.
Who's also, I guess, fallen a little bit since our last.
Yeah, right? I think it's weird because like every deck other than Law and Lucci has fallen, and I think that just means that the meta has kind of like everyone's kind of just taken a step back and been like, yeah, Law and Lucci are definitely the 2 top decks. So we're just gonna play these. Law is still favored into Enel. I think for Enel to beat Law, they have to see a lot of the Gardatsus, their Rocket Luffys, their Yamatos, and they just kind of have to be able to control the board as much as possible until they're able to drop those really big bodies, as Enel does anyway, or likes to do. But the one reason it's not in tier 1 is because Nami has become relevant. Moria is relevant again, and like we just said, Lucci and Law, they just have answers to everything.
Yeah, that's true. And a lot of NL players have actually kind of got the Law matchup down to a science for what that's worth. I know a lot of NLs actually give Laws a hard time if they starve. I know you've been doing really good into Laws. But overall, again, Bonney, you will see it. You will see probably 1 or 2. And NL is not good into Bonney. And then he's also, unfortunately, Nami is on the rise. And it just, NL does not have any way to beat Nami, really.
Yeah, for NL to beat Nami, they just have to go as tall as possible and then hope Nami doesn't see any triggers.
Yeah, which is insane. Moving on, this is kind of a surprise. I think this guy's really shot up the ladder from the last time we
and I don't know the deck that well anymore.
Neither.
From what I understand, it's become a little bit more of an aggro tempo deck that just happens to have black removal.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
I don't know the answers to this deck right now. It's in the last 2 weeks. Basically, this deck has just become super popular, and we know it did really well at Treasure Cup. It did pretty well in the last regional as well, and I think people are just like, yo, we don't want to play Lucci, so let's just play Moria again.
Yeah, I mean, objectively speaking, man, Moria has the better leader ability because I mean, you swing and you develop a body. It's kind of like the same vein as Dofi. Any leader that's like, getting to swing higher numbers at your opponent's life alongside putting a unit on board is good. It can really give Enel and Bonney, who like hoarding cards in hand, a tough time because they can just recur those Peronas over and over again, force them to trash. And yeah, it just has some like obnoxious plays that Lucci doesn't have access to. So even though I think Lucci does have the higher ceiling than Moria, a lot of people I think are finding that Moria is a little more consistent and feels a little safer to play. And yeah, I mean, it's been taking hella wins, man. It's been topping a lot of big events. So yeah, you can definitely expect to see way more Morias than we initially thought when we first were looking at OP7.
Yeah, and then last in our 1.5 tier, we have everyone's least favorite, Nami. And it just won Treasure Cup.
Dude.
And it's just sad that we have to see Nami up here. For what it's worth, if you're playing Law, it's not that difficult. You just keep swinging. And there are ways for Nami to win, but it's just not likely.
Yeah.
But everything, like, I think Nami's in that not weird spot. It's in that spot where it's like pretty good into everything. It has 1 or 2 kind of bad matchups.
Yeah.
But everything else, it can kind of like do its own thing and then just ignore the other guy across the table.
For sure, yeah, that's just ignore the opponent and do what I want to do. Yeah, that's the thing, man. It's I think before I felt like I had a lot of success against Nami just by swinging smart, just swinging the correct numbers, or splitting up my Dawn for the correct number of swings per turn, but that has become a much more delicate science now. Like, it's very hard to calculate what the right numbers are per turn now. Nami's package has just become so efficient. If they've got a Kaya on board, there's always the chance they're going to use that 4K, I think, Snake Dance to just return Kaya to hand, and then they get to replay the Kaya. The recyclability on Kaya is insane. Just the sheer amount of counter events they have is insane. That Kuja Pirate's blocker is annoying because Nami usually didn't play blockers before. She just went straight off the counter events. Turns out blockers are kind of freaking annoying. Like, you gotta get rid of them. They're just gonna sponge a swing. Her package has just become so efficient now that it's actually really tough for any deck that can't just pump out like 5K swings a turn, which is what Law excels at, which is why he wins that matchup. So any deck that can't do that, you're having a tough time, bro.
Yeah, so I think Nami's worst matchups are Law, like you said, and I think just Blue in general, because Blue is able to bottom deck. It kind of just ruins the player's math a little bit.
That's true.
But other than that, it just does what it wants to do every turn.
So tough. I think a lot of people are going to need to practice not swinging on certain turns.
Yeah, I think your go-to is if there's no down up, yeah, go ahead and swing because they're either
Yeah.
just using counter from hand or they're gonna take it.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there's really nothing more to say about that leader.
Yeah, just very tough. Very
Yeah.
actually a very tough matchup, very sweaty
Yeah.
matchup for most decks in the game right now. And going to tier 1, we have got Black Yellow Luffy. I think this has gone up slightly since our last video, just
Yeah.
because he has some bad matchups. He definitely has some bad matchups in the form of Bonney. His NL matchup isn't perfect, but I think Black Yellow Luffy players, including myself, are kind of learning how to play it better. And then blue is also kind of tough. Again, you got to play around pudding. This deck also likes hoarding cards in hand, so you do have to play around getting wrecked by a pudding if you do run into blue. So yeah, a few tough matchups here and there, but overall, he actually does really well into the highest performing decks of the game, which is going to be Lucci, Law, Moria, even to some degree, I would say. Even against NL, again, I think if you play it well, it's not terrible. So the highest decks in the game are actually good matchups for Luffy, but he struggles against definitely against Bonney and some of those like kind of closer to the fringe of the meta decks. So yeah, it's kind of tough to say, but I do think overall he has good matchups into the scariest decks.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Law just has a little bit of an advantage over it. I think
maybe slightly.
Just because it's able to spit out those 5, 6, 7k units multiple times a turn, and they can't go to 0 life that quickly.
Right, exactly. I think the Luffy player needs to be very measured about how they take life in the Law matchup, because if you get down to 1 life and you're not able to take that last life and then heal immediately, like Law will really punish you next turn. So yeah, you have to be a smart player for sure. Both the Law and the Luffy need to be smart players in that matchup, but I definitely think the Luffy is kind of on the back foot.
Yep. And then
overall scary deck, and then of course we've got Lucci in tier 1. So kind of maybe a surprise here, but we are putting Lucci in the same tier as Luffy. Omipity, why don't you talk about this?
I mean, coming into this meta, I was heavily on the Lucci boat. I thought Lucci would have been easily the top tier in this deck. And for whatever reason or the other, it's just not been performing as well as we thought it would be. And I should take that back. I think other decks have been performing well enough that we can't consider it like the best tier in the deck. Oh, sorry, the best deck in what am I trying to say? The best deck in the format. The best deck in the format.
Sure.
And like I think a lot of players are just finding it to be a little too inconsistent. Sure. Right? If it's heavily reliant on stage or finding your e-shows, then like there are games where if it doesn't see what it needs to see, it can just instantly lose. And I think even a Law matchup can be like that, right? If they don't see their Luccis early enough and they're not able to remove 2 things from board, Law is just still able to go wide and continue to stay wide, and just being able to spit out spoilers, guys. Law is tier 0.5. But if Law is just able to spit out those 5, 7k swings multiple times a turn, it's just impossible to keep up with that tempo, even for Lucci.
Yep. Like Law demands that Lucci remove 2 things per game, basically.
But on that note, Lucci did win regional today as well.
Yes.
The Gen Con regional.
Yeah. So I mean, still very competitive deck, very good. But like you said, I think other decks are performing better into it than we had initially assumed.
Exactly. And then, like we said, Law being our tier 0.5, and the one reason I have 0.5 is because I don't think there's a true tier 0 or S tier deck, just because there are so many decks that are playable. So Law, while it does like kind of gatekeep Law and Lucci, but BY Luffy, you kind of do gatekeep. Some decks, it's not as powerful as Sagazuki was or Whitebeard was. There's still room for these other decks to play. And like you see, like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 9 like truly competitive, or let's say 8 truly competitive decks.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, law is, like you said. I'm glad you pointed that out. I think tier 0 is a very loaded term. Reminds people of like formats where literally only one deck was playable. So I don't want to call it a tier 0 deck. But the reason we are putting it at tier 0.5 is because I think law is really the only leader on this list that does not have any bad matchups.
Yeah.
Like Lucci doesn't like seeing Luffy. Luffy doesn't like seeing Bonney. Bonney doesn't like seeing the blue players. Some of these decks hate seeing Enel. It's like there's a very rock paper scissorsy feel to this meta overall, and standing above all of that, kind of unfazed by whoever he might come across the table from him, is Law, where he just doesn't really care who's sitting across from him. He does have a solid game plan to win that match.
The only I think the only matchup that Law kind of fears is Lucci. Right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a high rolling Lucci, is maybe,
If Lucci sees if they see 2-3 Luccis in the game, it's wraps for Law. Like they're not going to be able to out tempo them. But if Law is able to just go wide, again, as we've said, Law just goes wide and starts swinging. It's like Zoro with removal. It's just kind of crazy. You just swing low, but you swing so many times in one turn. At some point, you're just sitting there like, wait, I have 4 cards in hand. They can very easily get through all of it right now. But yeah, I think that's pretty much how the meta has been shaping up. And I think as of now, this is how the rest of the meta will go. I don't see any kind of shakeups moving into OP08. I mean, obviously, OP08 will be very different. But I think from now until OP08, which comes out in October, I want to say.
Yeah, right? It'll be pretty stable. Yeah,
it'll be pretty stable from here on out.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, this list is meant to give you guys. I think we just wanted to do a better service to you guys if you are watching our tier list, as to what you're more likely to encounter when you go to a regionals. I think this is a better reflection of what regionals will be like now that we are getting very close to a lot of those bigger events. But yeah, this is the list, guys. Let us know what you think of it down below. Do you think that there are any leaders that should be moved up or down on here, or any weird off meta picks that might steal some games? Let us know in the comments down below. And as always, if you do like this video, make sure to comment and subscribe. It really does help us out, and we will see you in the next one, guys. Peace.